Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. Alhamdulillah, this is now episode 44 of the podcast, the fourth of myself, Brother Mahdi Locke, and Alhamdulillah, I'm joined again by Al-Hajj Abu Ja'far al-Hanbali, and today's topic is, who are the Arabs? So we've just completed another one about white culture, what is white culture, and the misconceptions that many Muslims have about where white people come from, what their culture is, their customs, their traditions, and so forth. And now we want to look at the other side of the coin, really, and talk about the Arab world, who are the Arabs, and so forth. So the first question is that who are the Arabs and where do they come from?
Okay. Alhamdulillah. Salatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. So when we're talking about an Arab, who are the Arabs and where do they come from? The first thing is we have to break down that the Arabs in many ways are two people. There's the first Arabs that were located primarily in the south of Arabia, the peninsula today, which is Yemen, that whole lower area. They were located there. These were called the people of Qahtan, these Qahtani people. They were located primarily there. These Qahtani people tend to have a admixture of whatever stock was there and then the stock that produced the ancient Egyptians of history, which when you look at most of the listings of what they're classified as, they would be classified as a Bantu speaking or Bantu people, because the ancient Egyptians spoke a Niger Cordofanian speech, and that this is classified under Bantu language as well as ethnic group. So this is these people from the south. Now, when we talk about the Arabs of the history that most people are familiar with, then these are called the Adnani Arabs. Now, the language spoken, before we come to the Adnani Arabs, the language spoken by these Qahtani Arabs is different to the language that is spoken by the Arabs that would come about 4,000 years ago. You can understand it if it's spoken, but it's mainly preserved in historical accounts, etchings and carvings, almost in the same way that you'd see, say, hieroglyphs preserved inside of Egyptian monuments. It's similar to that. The Adnani Arabs were produced by a coalescing and coming together of Aramaeans, which were the dominant ruling class of the Fertile Crescent, which included Iraq and areas around there. So these were dominant ruling people of the Fertile Crescent, and then also the Bantu peoples that are coming together of southern Egypt. Now, we as Muslims see this in history of the marriage between the Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, who's coming from these Aramaean people coming out of that Iraq area, and Hajar alayhi salam, who's coming from that southern Egypt area. And those, again, these people are these Bantu ethnic people. The production of that, what produced this, is the Prophet Ismail alayhi salam, known in Hebrew as Ishmael, known in English as Ishmael. This produced the Arabs of 4,000 years ago that most people, when they mention the word Arab, are referring to them.
So when we talk about the Qahtani Arabs, they're older. And is that where, say, Ad and Thamud would fall in?
Yes, they're going to come. They're going to come from those people, because there's the hadith that is mentioned by many different collections. The first one that comes to mind is it's quoted with a separate chain by Abdul Malik ibn Hisham in his Sirat al-Nabawiyah, which is the commentary on Ibn Ishaq's Sirat Rasulillah, in which he says the Arabs are four. The prophets of the Arabs are four. And he mentioned Hud, Salih, Shu'aib, wa Nabiyukum. And it's like, okay, well, Hud and Salih, they predate Nabiyuna Ismail alayhi salam, yet they're Arabs. Right.
So they're Qahtani.
Yes, these would be these Qahtani people.
Okay, so when we look at the makeup of the Arab world now, so those Qahtani Arabs, what's happened to them?
Well, there are isolated communities of them, because when the Adnani Arabs begin to reproduce, when you look at the story behind them, you look at the historical narrative behind them, Hajar alayhi salam is taken out of the home by command of Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam, who's commanded by his Lord, our Lord Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, takes her and her young son out of the home. And both of them are put in the valley in Mecca, which at the time was uninhabited. They then are put in the situation where they have fewer and fewer and fewer rations for food, until finally a tribe, the Jurhum tribe, come along and assist them after a miracle in which the spring of Zamzam is revealed. Now, the fact that Hajar alayhi salam is able to speak to these Jurhum people and to communicate with them is indication that there's some linkage between these people. If not the same people, there's certainly a related people to her. Then 12 sons, after the Prophet Ismail alayhi salam gets married, as these 12 sons, and then these 12 sons then spread out to these different oases, and they began to mix with the Qahtani Arabs. Now, in certain isolated communities, these Qahtani Arabs still exist. Mountain passes, sort of the lower basins, these areas, they're still there. So there wasn't a complete...
On the peninsula.
That's it. So there wasn't a complete just dissolution of all of the Qahtani Arabs. There are still sections and pieces of them left today.
Okay. So that means that the Adnani Arabs and the Qahtani Arabs, did they mix into it to a large degree?
They mixed to a large degree. They mixed among each other, but you can still see communities of Qahtanis left over. They're not completely absorbed and gone. There are still big swathes of them left.
Okay. Now, did they look different, Qahtani Arabs and Adnani Arabs, initially speaking?
They're gonna look different. If you look at, say, the Qahtani Arabs are going to be taller. They're going to be, the skin tone will probably be slightly different. They may be lighter than the Adnani Arabs, and the nose bridge. So if you look at, say, the nose bridge of ancient Egyptians, the way the bridge just comes straight out of the skull, it doesn't have an arc or something like that. That's one of the signs. The eyes are further spaced apart. They have a second epicanthic eye fold. So normally you have, the Adnani Arabs are going to have, say, 1 or 2 epicanthic eye folds. The Qahtani Arabs are going to have like 3 epicanthic eye folds, which means the eyes are going to be more almond shaped. The hair is going to be wavier. Space between the hands, the teeth will have spaces in between them individually, right? So there'll be these superficial things that you can kind of see.
Okay. So when we talk nowadays about what's called the Arab world, coming down in the modern age, this Arab world, this obviously is the result of the Futuhat during the time of the companions, and then Muslims, these Arabs, spread from out of the Arabian Peninsula, and they go across North Africa,
Right.
and then they go to the east, as far as into Persia and then into India and so forth.
Right.
So now we call that the Arab world, but obviously there are other people there beforehand.
Yes, there were other people there beforehand, and the expression Arab world is usually referred to by people who are in the know. It's referred to linguistically as the Arab world, in the sense that the lingua franca is the Arab world. There's not that many people who assume that Arab world means ethnically that all of these people are Arabs. If we can set the stage for when the Arabs left out of the peninsula and encountered other peoples, it will make more sense. So at the time, just before the Arabs leave the peninsula to go to other places to bring Islam, the Aramaean Empire was the larger empire in the Fertile Crescent. And this empire, the speakers were speakers of the Aramaean language. And so this was the lingua franca you're looking at Syria, parts of Lebanon, most of Iraq, and other areas around there. Even parts of what's considered Turkey today were part of the Aramaean Empire. And there's even been a resurgence in the last 50 years of the Aramaean national identity, and them being very insistent on being referred to as who they are. So you might have seen, if you ever go to Syria or you ever go to Lebanon, you might have seen sort of these deep crimson flags with a falcon on it, or a phoenix that's facing to its left, and it's clutching the 12 arrows, and those 12 arrows are the different provinces in the Aramaean Empire. So that's one.
What time period are we talking about now?
So the Aramaeans are running from 2000 BC up until just before the Arabs explode onto the scene after Islam.
But how do they relate to the Romans and the Persians?
Okay, the Arameans are their own group of people. They're a Semitic people. In terms of the Romans and the Persians, they're an empire that's next door, and they've had to fend them off. So when we're hearing words like Chaldean, Assyrian, that's them.
Okay.
They're just other words for them. Now, when they convert to Christianity, they still keep their language, but they adopt the Christian religion. So now the Romans or the Byzantines cease being enemies, and it's just the Persians now.
Oh, okay.
And because they're being buffeted and protected by the Eastern and Western Roman Empire, the Persians become less of a threat to the Aramaean Empire, which has now, at least outwardly, espoused Christianity.
Okay.
In Lebanon, most of Lebanon, you're dealing with the Phoenician Empire, which are called the Sea Peoples, the peoples of Carthage. And those people ran, in terms of the maritime influence, they ran like the Mediterranean.
Okay.
So the Phoenician language, sometimes called Ugaric, sometimes called Punic, sometimes called Canaanite, it's those people, and they're there. In North Africa, you're primarily dealing with, in Egypt, you're dealing with the rise of the Greeks coming into Egypt. Now, the Greeks come into Egypt around 200 BC, and they end the Egyptian empire of the pharaohs, and they mix in. Now, at the time just before the Arabs come out with Islam from the peninsula, the time just before that, Egypt is Coptic or Greek speaking. It is Coptic Christian, and it has its own set of religious strictures and functions. The rest of North Africa, going on to the west of North Africa, religiously speaking, is Unitarian, and ethnically speaking is Berber, Amazigh, Tuareg, all these different ethnic groups. It's all these things. So that's sort of setting the stage of what the world looks like just before the Arabs come onto the scene.
Yeah.
So in the Aramaean Empire, the Phoenician Empire, they're Semites, so there's a relation between them and the Arabs, but they are different ethnic peoples. And then the Berbers, they're different altogether.
And how, I think you mentioned this before, because Herodotus mentions the Arabs in his histories. This is 300 plus BC. Is it he who gives them the description as being, I think he describes them being trustworthy, upright people. Like if they make a vow to do something, they'll do it.
That's correct.
But I think you mentioned before how the Arabs were depicted in some drawings as being carrying sheep and wearing stripy clothing. Where is that from?
Yes. Now, when you look at pictures of the Arabs carrying sheep or doing animal husbandry and wearing striped clothes, you see pictures of this, the Egyptian depictions of Arabs who they call the Eastern invaders or the Easterners. And they often use derisive language for Arabs because they constantly had clashes with them. And so the depictions of them wearing sort of these striped clothing, simple looking beards and clothes, shoulder length hair, right? All these descriptions, wearing sandals. These evidences are further proofs that, okay, this is what the Arabs look like. And some of the patterns on the clothing are similar to patterns on clothing that Arabs wear today. Some of them are identical. Like there's one that has, it's blue, and then it has black horizontal stripes. It's like that's still worn today by some Arab groups, by some groups of Arabs. That type of clothing is still worn today. So it's survived all those thousands of years and it's still worn today.
Okay. So, but obviously before, I mean, this is another, it's relevant, not only as a side note or a tangent. To what degree do we say that the Arabs, before they come out of the peninsula to preach Islam, to what extent would we say that they are isolated or cut off? Because obviously they have, we know that this is in the Quran, sort of the Quraysh, the fact that they're going, Qurayshis themselves are making trips to Sham, making trips to Yemen.
Sure.
They have some familiarity with the outside world. So what extent, because some people try to say that they're isolated, people are on their side and say, no, they were fully immersed. They knew about the other. They knew about the other. This is an Orientalist view. They'll say they knew about the neighboring civilization, and therefore that they were able to borrow from them and create Islam.
Right. It's the truth of this. The truth of the matter is somewhere stacked in the middle of both of those. When you look at the name that they give to the peninsula, the Jazira, the island, it's because on one side it's water, and the other three sides it's sand. So in the sense of being isolated, they're isolated in that they had not and have not been conquered by a power that's come and just taken over the whole area, because there are natural barriers in place that just preclude that.
Like the desert.
Yes, it's too much. The mountain ranges are too high. It's too much to scale. The temperatures in Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter, are just too much even today for any army to bear. It's not worth it. It's better to create treaties and protectorates. So throughout history, there's always been different Arab groups that were under the influence of different empires because they had protectorates, they had treaties. So they were isolated in the sense that they were cut off from being fully absorbed or dissolved into other civilizations and going through a colonial period. But they weren't isolated in the sense that they weren't aware of other civilizations around them. They were capable of having a spice trade. They were capable of having a frankincense mercantile business. They were capable of importing idols from Syria and moving back and forth. They were capable of having a silken business and getting involved with the Silk Road. Those things were possible, but not to the degree to where you could literally craft an entire civilization. Right? It's simply not possible, because the building blocks needed to craft an entire interdependent, interwoven civilization just wasn't there.
Yeah. Because the only unifying thing, I was covering this in my Arabic classes, the only unifying thing they actually had was their poetry. Like the one thing they agreed upon were like the urud and the qafiyat. That they agreed on that, like the prosody, the meters of poetry. Other than that, there was like
I mean, very little agreement. We're talking with people that, yes, they knew that each group was Arab, but they did not intermarry to the degree that, well, we're Arabs and they're Arabs. No, there were very deep tribal conflicts and ethnic differences between them that, although they knew that they were Arabs, they had very specific manners of intermarriage and when that could happen, and treaties, and when there'd be war treaties and armistices and all these other things. They had very, very particular ways of leading their lives.
Okay. So, when it comes to again today's period, so now we have these funny terms nowadays, like the Middle East,
right?
Or the Middle East. What is technically the Middle East?
Well, the Middle East, because you have to remember, some people making these designations, they're looking at it from their standpoint. So when you look at the map as prepared by English cartographers or others, the map has England where it is. And then when they're looking at the East, they're thinking, okay, the Middle East from them.
In the Far East.
That's it, from their standpoint. Yeah. Some people, when they mean Middle East, they mean Middle East politically. And by Middle East, they mean the influence of the Arab world. So sometimes people will find that the nations that are traditionally known as the Middle East, like Arabia, Iraq, Iran, then Egypt will be included in that. And like some of like Eastern Africa. And people will say, oh, that's wrong. That's not the Middle East. And in that sense, they don't mean Middle East in that sense. They mean Middle East like politically.
Yeah. Not
necessarily geographically. In politically, the main players in the Middle East. Because when you look at the wars between Israel and its neighbors, Egypt is included in what's called the Middle East wars. Although it's not in the Middle East, it's on the continent of Africa. It's not even in it's on the African plate. It's not in Asia.
Yeah.
But politically, because the people have come from a nation that's Middle Eastern, they consider them politically part of that problem or part of that issue.
So we can ask some questions about Egypt in particular, because that's where you're from. Initially, you're Shu'aib Masr.
Yeah.
So you're from southern Egypt. Nothing mixed in, just pure Arab.
Yeah, pretty much.
So what would be the ethnic makeup of Egypt today, for example? Like, especially in the north, what groups make up the Egyptians of the north?
Okay, so to properly understand this, you have to go back in time and then fast forward. So when the Arabs come out of the peninsula, they arrive in places like Syria with smaller armies and groups of people in Syria. And the Aramaean language gives way to the Arabic language as the official language, as the lingua franca. The people don't disappear, they're still there. Right? The same thing happens with the Lebanese. The Lebanese are still Phoenicians. An example of this is often they'll say, Shu'aib or Shu'ism. Now, Shu in Phoenician is what?
Yeah.
But Mada is what in Arabic? And people just assume that, it's a dialect. No, it's not a dialect. There's been an admixture. There's been sort of a connectivity that's happened between Phoenician, which is Semitic, and Arabic. And there's a lot of other Phoenicianisms that are being spoken by the Lebanese, whether they realize it or not, that are proofs that these peoples are using Arabic as their second language. Even though they might speak it as their L1 to use jargon, they're still speaking Arabic as a second language because these people are Phoenicians. And Phoenician is still spoken by individual groups within there. And they're still ethnically as a people. They still exist. Now, for Egypt, the Arabs arrived there through Amr ibn al-As and Khalid ibn al-Walid. They arrive there and they find Greek people, they find Greeks, they find Copts, which are these ancient Egyptian people. They find them. And you have around 600 people running the whole country. And Egypt takes several thousand years before it gets to the point today where it's 15 or 20% Christian and the rest Muslim. That's a very slow and long and laborious process. The initial settlements, because Cairo would not be built until the Fatimid period by Al-Qahir Billah, who builds Cairo as a dedication to his own name. There was no Cairo at this point. You had encampments outside of what would be considered the old city.
Like Fustat.
Fustat, yeah, those are encampments. But then they head further south as well. And they come to places like Sianet and Swenet. And Sianet is changed to Asyut. And Swenet is changed to Eswan. And these people take some of the Bantu, they take Bantu wives, as had been the past with Hajar and Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam, and they consider this as part of an admixture mixing in, because that's how you produce the Adnani Arabs. So they welcome this process of, okay, we're sort of re-upping, or we're sort of recharging our batteries. We're going back in and recharging with these people that we came out of. And so just married into them. And that is where these differences came. Now, when you then come to the invasions of Egypt that happened by the Ottomans, who at this point are Turks. It's before the great invasions that would come hundreds of years after, where the Corsicans would come in and the Greeks and everything else. So the people in today's Turkey are Turkish. They're not Turks because they're Greeks now. They're Armenians. They're everything else. Right. The same thing in Egypt's north, because the Ottomans rule there. And the Ottomans then create sort of an ethnic system where they break the city up into quarters. This is the Armenian quarter. This is the Greek quarter. This is the Arab quarter. This is the Jewish quarter. And they create this ethnic system to try to sort of bring about some form of harmony between these peoples. So by bringing about this harmony, you say, okay, this person, his name is Ahmed al-Arabi. He's an Arab, lives in the Arab quarter. So the needs and whatever he has are accounted for. This is Yohanan al-Turki, or Turkiya. He's a Turk. He's living in the Turkish quarter or the Armenian quarter. And this is how these people live. And those names, calling people Bey or Effendi and these type of names, it stayed until then.
Yeah.
That's until now. So it's
like
stayed
Basha,
up until now.
so
Yeah, Basha, these type of names. Muhammad Ali Basha continued on because he was a Macedonian. Although he was ethnically Albanian, he came from Macedonia, comes down, sweeps in, and then brings Albanians as well into Egypt. So now you've got Albanians there in the north. From, say, Fayoum down, it's remained pretty ethnically homogenous. Simply because of
the
environment, how treacherous the heat is, the atmosphere, the process of marching all the way down the Nile. It just simply was not viewed as attractive enough to make that big of a trek down there. So in the south, you will find the Nubian people. So you find the Nuba, the Nubians, which are two separate people. So the Nuba, the Nubians, then the Copts, and then Arabs. Among the Arabs, you'll find Felahin, and then the Bedu, right? Whereas in the north, the Arabs you'll find more often than not will be the Hadri, which are the settled Arabs. Where in the south, you find
the city dwellers.
Yeah, you find the south, you'll find the Bedouins, which are your regular travelers, or the Falah, which are seasonal travelers. So they'll have a summer house, and then they'll have where they stay throughout the rest of the year. And so these people live there. Then when you go to somewhere like Asyut, which is divided almost in half ethnically, along both Christian and racial terms. So the Christians are like all Copts, and the Muslims are Arabs. and the Falah or the Bedu. So there's these divisions that exist. So the South is pretty ethnically homogenous.
So what about, because this is one of the things we had this discussion last year, because it came up of, I mean, for example, like right next door in Libya, we've now got this horrible phenomenon of slave markets, right? And this is meant to be, this is said to be, say, people trying to migrate through to Europe, but they're coming from sub-Saharan Africa. They're coming from Cameroon or Chad, which is just to the south, over the Niger, or these places.
Central African Republic.
So, yeah, these places, and they're coming up to Libya, and then they're just being sold into slave markets. And then, so people, especially in the United States, they're looking at thinking like, oh, look at this. This is Arab on black racism.
Yeah.
But that's kind of a mistermed or maybe misunderstood. It's not quite the same thing.
The problem with this, there's a number of things going on, is you have to understand Libya is both Arab and Berber. So you have people who are mixed, who are half Arab, half Berber, like in the case of the late Muammar Gaddafi, who's like half Arab, half Berber. And there's an entire clan, the Qadhafa, that he came from. Then you have people who are Arabs. Then you have people who are Berbers. And a lot of the clashes that are happening are ethnic clashes that are based on these people coming through and coming into contact with foreign peoples or other people. It's not based upon because people always assume that the rest of the world functions how the United States does in terms of racial politics.
Yeah.
And that's simply not the case. You'll have people who are the same skin color. When in 1956, when Sudan and Egypt had their separation, right? Those are the exact same skin color, exact same appearance, everything else. They had this huge war. It had nothing to do with the fact of, well, they're dark and it has nothing to do with that. And a lot of the people, when you look at in these markets or whatever, some of them are the same color as the people that are being sold. The people that are coming up from the Central African Republic and coming into Libya, these are to do with ethnic issues, with Berber on Central African Republic, or Berber or Arab on other people, or Arabs versus others. But it's not the racial dynamic that's been included. Is not that. It's that these people were taken in battles. It's not justification or anything. The point of it is what's actually happening, which people are being taken in battle, they're being fought. Because when you say, well, those people are being targeted for no other reason that they're black. When you speak to the Central African Republic people, they don't say we're black.
Yeah, same with Kenyans or Ethiopians.
Yeah,
or
they say we're
Nigerians
Kenyans, we're Ethiopian. Again, this is another construct that's been put together, in the United States. They don't see themselves that. Ethiopians don't see themselves, no, are you black? No. When I grew up and saw Ethiopians, and some of them were friends of ours, people would constantly get angry with them in the United States, because some people that they answer to that moniker would ask them, are you black? And Ethiopians would say, no, we're Ethiopians. And some of them don't even like the term African, because they're like, no, we're not with them, because African to them means, no, it means with these group of people, and we're not with them. We're our own nation. So that, also keeping that in mind, you have to remember, it's like Gaddafi's elite guards, including his female guards, most of them came from sub-Saharan Africa. His most elite and trusted guards. His nurses were Scandinavians, but his most elite troops, the female combat troops, were sub-Saharan Africans.
So when we see these because I remember we looked at one of these images or videos last year, and people are labeling and say, look, this is a black man being abused by Arabs. But you look closely, it's like, no, that black man that man who's been termed as black could very well be an Arab.
Yeah.
And those other men in the picture who you're calling Arab could very well be Turkish or
because there's this misunderstanding that anyone who looks Romanian or Turkish or Polish, that man must be an Arab, and that the people that are dark are not. When you look at pictures of what are called, when the incident in Darfur happened, okay, and this was one of the greatest tests of this false idea of the black-white paradigm. When the Darfur situation happened, there were people who belonged to non-Arab ethnic groups who were being targeted and attacked. And they said they're being attacked by the Arab Janjaweed militias.
Yeah.
Forget the Janjaweed and the derivation of the name and whether it's sound or not. Forget that. The militias that were attacking them were mainly desert Arabs. And every time you saw footage or photos of desert Arabs, speaking Arabic, desert Arabs. They live by themselves, and there's this distinction between the Bedouin Arabs. You have the Bedouin Arabs and then the Arabi. Now, the Bedouin Arabs are people who animal husbandry, sheep, everything else. The desert Arabs, Arabi, are almost exclusively cameleers living along the desert.
They're nomadic.
That's it. Completely. They're not shepherds. They're almost exclusively cameleers. The pictures they showed of the desert Arabs were tall, lanky, extremely dark-skinned, with straight hair, black irises, not even brown, black irises, or black pupils. Right? They were attacking people who ethnically were Dinka, and the Dinka were actually lighter than them.
Yeah.
So where does this argument then go now regarding this Arab on black and it's light skin? Where does this argument go now? It goes nowhere. It goes nowhere.
Yeah, because I think it's one of the major things we want to clarify. So the overall lesson of this is the fact that when people look at the Arab world, you first of all, you cannot. Well, there's actually a second thing to draw mind to bring up here. The first thing is, not everyone in the Arab world is ethnically an Arab. That's the first thing.
That's the first thing.
Right?
Our Arab world should be considered more likely as linguistic.
Yeah, it's the Arabic-speaking world.
Yes.
So because there's Berbers, there are Kurds, there are Turks, there are Armenians, Armenians,
and these people are
Copts.
Yeah, these people are very quick to let you know that they are as well. Yeah. They're very quick to let you know. You might see it on social media accounts. You might see it. They're quick to, I'm not Arab. I'm so-and-so, not Arab. And they don't mean insult by that.
Yeah.
But they want it understood that this is who we are.
And are there even examples, I think you mentioned this, it was in Iraq, are there even examples of like Arabs suffering racism?
Yes. In
the Arab world?
Yeah, I mean, you had sort of Chaldean on Arab violence. Where there's Arabs being...
Is it in Iraq? Or?
Yeah, this is in Iraq, in places like Al-Basra, near Az-Zubayr, and places around sort of that southern bottom area, sometimes in Anbar province, right? Arabs being targeted, for ethnic violence. We don't want them here. We don't want this. Because these are places where people are speaking Chaldean, they're using it in their schools, and some of them feel at times put upon because Arabic is just everywhere. It's all over the place. It's ubiquitous. And for once, we have our own schools. We have our own. We don't want them around here. We just don't want it because you have to remember, ethnically, Arabs are a very small part of the Iraqi society, ethnically speaking.
Probably for Syrian as well.
That's it. The same thing in Syria. The great majority of Syria is Aramean. Then after Arameans, you've got Kurds. Yeah. Then you
the major ulama are Kurds.
That's it. Most of the big scholars. So you have all these different makeup groups all these different groups that are there. Bashar al-Assad is not ethnically Arab. He's something else.
Yeah.
Right. So all these different people that are there. It's like the Arabs make up a very small part, and you can tell looking at the Syrians that they clearly are not Arabs. By the way their eyes are spaced, the size of their head, measurement, their body type, their build, their complexion. And historically, when you look at pictures of Syrians throughout history that they've drawn of themselves up till now, they look pretty much by and large the same. And because they look by and large the same, you have no reason but to conclude they're the same people. And they've either been drawing themselves or other people have been drawing them. And when you look at how Arabs have drawn pictures of themselves throughout history, how the ancient Egyptians have drawn them, they tend to be these caramel to cocoa colored people and no darker. So like every qawm or people has genetic, they have a certain genetic variation. They tend to stay between sort of this caramel to cocoa color or bronze, because all the peoples around them that have ever drawn them keep drawing them in that fashion.
And that's why, because not only is it major ulama, I think this is another thing that needs to be brought up. It's not just people like, say, Imam al-Bulti or Imam Ahmad Zuhayli who are Kurds. They're not actually Arabs, but also people make this assumption that, for example, Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, he's an Arab because he's coming out of that world. It's like, no, he's a Kurd as well. He's from Tikrit.
Yeah, because they assume, well, that's in Iraq. And that's Arab. No. Iraq might be Arabic speaking, but Tikrit itself is a Kurdish outpost, and it still is today. These people are, by and large, now that doesn't mean there's no Arabs in Tikrit.
Saddam Hussein was Arab.
Yeah, Saddam Hussein has some Kurdish blood in him, though, as well.
But he's mainly Arab.
Yeah,
he seems mainly as an Arab. Because I remember there was one of these movies they made about Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi in the Crusades, and one of these English reporters was celebrating, saying, "Finally, they have an Arab to play Salatin Layubi."
Yeah, it's just a complete mistake. Yeah, this is a Kurd. You're supposed to have a Kurd should be playing this man. Now, obviously, we understand there may be a dearth of ethnic Kurdish actors.
Yeah.
But, at least to try to understand that his language at home was probably Kurdish. Yeah. His language was probably Kurdish. He's probably this, and we understand we have, within Arabs, there will be ethnic diversity, but just like with every people, there tends to be certain common characteristics that we see over and over again. Now, every now and then there'll be an anomaly. Like, for example, because historians always give depictions, or they give descriptions, or they leave behind data. When one of the children of Abu Umar al-Maqdisi, who's the elder brother of Muwafaquddin ibn Qudam al-Maqdisi, was asked about his physical description, they said he was tall.
This is like 900 years ago.
Yeah, this is 900 years ago. Now we're talking about Palestinian Arabs, which are still within that spectrum. But they asked about his description, and they said that he was tall, he had light skin. They said, but it wasn't amhaq, meaning pale. It was bayed, which means it was off-white. It was sort of going towards light brown, but that his eyes were blue. Right? So there's this sort of genetic variation, that exists because of maybe there was intermarriage, or it's just the genetics of it. But there's always, within every group of people, there's just this general standpoint that exists between them.
And the Maqdisis, this family, they descend from
the Maqdisis, they are direct descendants of Umar ibn al-Khattab.
Well, and he looked like what?
Yeah, and he was tall and brown. He's very tall and brown. So either there was some type of intermarriage, between them at some point, where they married into some people that were local there, because again, Palestine had Arameans and still does. Or it's just the nature that throughout every so many years, these genetic variations appear. It's not impossible.
It's also possible to think about where does this idea in the Anglosphere come from of just the Arabs there? Because I remember studying history at university and in England at Leeds, and doing a course about doing a module about the Renaissance in Europe, and these figures would come up like Ibn Rushd and Ibn Sina and Al-Ghazali at one point, and it's like, and my professor, like he absolutely, he refused to refer to these people as Muslims. It was just the weirdest thing. It's like so Ibn Sina, where is he from? What is he? Like, well, he's a Muslim. It's like, no, he's an Arab.
Yeah.
I was like, he's a Persian.
Yeah.
But you're just looking at all an Arab. I was like, no, Imam Ghazali's a Persian. Ibn Rushd is a...
Ibn Rushd is like Berber, some type of mixture of that and some other things.
Yeah, but this equating of just Islam, Arab, Arab is like, he's an Arab, he's a Muslim, he's an Arab.
That's it. And it's like interchangeable. And I think a similar mistake was made with like Christian and Greek.
Yeah.
There's an assumption, okay, he's Christian, he's Greek. He's Christian, he's Greek. Yeah. It's like, well, that's a mistake, because you've got Slavs, you've got other things. And now since history has rolled on from that point, Greeks are not even the dominant ethnic group anymore in the Christian world. So it's like, it seems if you tried to say that now, you'd be looked at as a fool. But back then you could understand, because that Koine Greek was the lingua franca. It was also a dominant culture back then, so you can understand why they'd make that sort of distinction.
And the original Gospels were in Koine Greek.
That's it. So they'd say, okay, well, you can understand why they'd say, okay, Greek, Greek is Christianity, Christianity is Greek. But now, the largest Christian groups aren't Greek at all. They're not even ethnically Greek. They don't speak Greek at all.
Yeah, and even the largest Muslim groups are not Arabs.
Yeah.
The largest Muslim group now is like the Indonesians.
Yeah, it's like 300 million plus people spread over 13,500 islands on archipelago, and they're not Arabs. Maybe the Yemenis brought them Islam.
Yeah.
But they did not come and sort of overwhelm them genetically.
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen. There's not enough numbers. There's not enough guys. And that's another thing that has to be kept in mind. There's a thought that's put across by some people that, these Arab armies are just going out and just genetically just overwhelming and outbreeding everyone, and just arriving in Syria and just breeding the women out like wild animals. And it doesn't work like that. You have, numbers against the Arabs, sometimes 100,000, 50,000. Arabs running a country, like in the case of Egypt, where there's like 600 of them running a country. How did they genetically white out or genetically blot out the previous ethnicity? They didn't.
Yeah.
They didn't. They came there. They arrived. They said, okay, well, what we're going to do is now we're going to set up the language of official business is going to be Arabic. Just as much as, the English didn't come and just ethnically blot out India.
Yeah.
They came, they made the language of official discourse English, and that's been the way it is. But you go to India, you can clearly see that English people did not just overwhelm the Indians to the point of just genetic extermination.
Yeah, they winked out of existence.
Yeah.
So on that note, so now we understand that because I think Arabs make up maybe 20% of the Muslim population.
Yeah, very small amount, and 20s being like charitable.
Yeah.
Might be less
because also the Indonesians, and there's people in some continent, and it's obviously the sub-Saharan African countries.
Yeah, they're huge.
Like in Nigeria, and
all those areas. I mean,
all the way up to Mali, Senegal,
that's it. That whole top of Africa. If you start getting from say, when you hit the equator and go down, that's no longer. We're not talking about Arab territory anymore. We're just talking about going all the way down, sub-Saharan African, Bantu, all these different nations. And that's it. And you don't run across the Arabs again. Madagascar, you don't run across them again. Zanzibar, they crop up for a second. And as fast as they crop up, they're gone again. Because it's too many people. It's just too many people.
Yeah. And then also the same thing, with the exception, I think, of the Arab Peninsula itself. But when you get into places like Syria and Egypt, you're going to find still these major significant Christian minorities as well.
Yeah. And these Christian minorities have held on to not only their Christian minority status, but their ethnic status whenever they've been able to. So you do find Arab Christians, a lot of Palestinians, there's more Palestinians that are Christian than Muslim. So they've held on to that. But you'll also find like Aramean Christians, Chaldeans,
Assyrian,
which are Arameans, Assyrian, which are Arameans again. Right? You keep having these people cropping up again and again that are doing their service as an Aramean or Peshitta or Syriac. And there's a reason for that.
Yeah. Which does go against this whole theory of Islam spreading with a sword and wiping these people out.
Yeah.
Because how are they still there?
Well, I think one of the most beautiful examples was when they were saying, well, in Islam, if you're not Muslim, you just have to become Muslim or die. And then the article right under that is large Christian communities fleeing the Middle East in unprecedented numbers. It's like, wait a minute, aren't they all dead? They're supposed to be gone. There's not supposed to be any Christianity left.
Yeah.
How are they fleeing? And if they're fleeing now, why weren't they fleeing before?
Yeah, exactly.
It was actually easier to leave the Middle East back then years ago before these wars started. So why didn't they run then?
So isn't it right? This is something that I've sort of observed myself. That what I'm just guessing here is that a lot of these tensions that have risen recently, because obviously there's ISIS in Syria and Iraq forcing the Chaldeans out, and the
putting noons on houses.
Yeah. What on houses?
The noons on houses, like the noon for Nasara.
Oh,
like it's like the letter N. We know you're a Christian.
Like, were they hiding it before? Yeah. but also a lot of this stuff has come about maybe over the past 100 years, especially with the rise of Muslim Brotherhood and these organizations, where people just, these Muslim groups sort of feel that they're, I don't know how to recover past glories that I'd say we need to just lash out at. These old Christian communities.
Yeah, a lot of it's been that where they've decided, okay, we're going to try to drive out all the Jews and all the ethnic Christians from this area. We're going to get rid of them, and it's like, well, wait a minute, hold on. These communities were here prior to you, and if they've been here for thousands of years, it would mean that there was a previous precedent where people thought there's no harm between us living with each other.
Yeah.
You have a huge community of Moroccan Jews. Huge.
Yeah.
There's still a tiny community of Tunisian Jews. Yeah. And Libyan Jews.
Yeah, there's a Jew. I mean, because I lived in Fez, there's a Jewish graveyard in Fez, but I know Fez in particular, a lot of those, the vast majority of them did pack up and move to Israel. Yeah. I think around after the Yom Kippur War.
Yeah, just too much internecine fighting and everything else. They just had to shift.
So they had to shift, but that's how it's always been. So this kind of, because there are some Muslims nowadays, they have these funny ideas where they look at churches or even older relics like the pyramids in Egypt and what Palmyra in Syria.
They think that's got to go.
We have to destroy this. Well, how come this wasn't destroyed before?
Yeah, the very first Muslims arrived there and didn't say, well, we're here for spring cleaning, it's time to clean up. Yeah, they didn't do that. They arrived there, and we have to remember, always remember, and this is pounded into people's chests, that the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and the Church of the Nativity stand in the middle. They're surrounded by Muslims.
Hmm.
And it's never suffered as much damage as it did since the Israeli occupation.
Wow.
It's still every day to this day that a Muslim walks down and opens the doors to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And the only time it's ever closed its doors in history is because there was refurbishment that was supposed to be due.
Yeah.
And the different Christian groups that managed it could not agree. So just close the doors.
Wow.
They just close the doors.
Yeah. I remember reading about this. What's the book called? It's called From the Holy Mountain by William Dalrymple. That's interesting. I read that book I think 1999. That's an interesting book because he actually starts at Mount Athos in Greece, and then visits all the Orthodox Christian monasteries throughout, say, Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, through Jerusalem. Ends up in Alexandria, and he talks about this kind of stuff happening in. As far as I remember, this happening in Jerusalem. These issues did not exist. It wasn't Muslims causing problems. For Christians in Jerusalem. Yeah,
people are aware that Muslims, as long as they've been there. Now, there have been flare-ups and there have been issues, but there was never a situation where we said, okay, Christians and Jews just can't function. They just cannot exist here. It's like, listen, the most important signs and symbols of Christianity are in the Muslim world.
Yeah.
The Church of the Holy Sepulchre and the Church of Nativity, they're there. The Via Dolorosa, the walk that Christians say Christ took on the way to the crucifixion, that whole time during Passion Week, that's done every day without issue. It wasn't until every year there used to be a pre-Christmas pageantry celebration where the Christians from Gaza, yes, there are Christians in Gaza, they used to make a procession from there all the way to Bethlehem. And it was in 2012 that 1,800-year-old tradition got stopped.
By who?
By the Israeli government.
Wow.
Because they said, we can't be sure that there won't be militants posing as Christians among you doing this. We just cannot be sure. So that custom was interrupted after thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Not by us.
Yeah, or 1,800 years, yeah. But also the same thing with a lot of these, people don't remember, people don't recall, is a lot of these Palestinian, what are called terrorist organizations, they're not all run by Muslims either.
Yeah, they have, there's different...
What was the one that, was it the Munich Massacre?
Yeah, the Munich Massacre, that's you're looking at Black September, which is, again, this is like secularists, the Palestinian National Liberation Front, those are communists and secularists. George Habash, who ran the Palestinian National Liberation Front, was an Orthodox Christian. He's like an Assyrian Orthodox. So it's like, that's not all Muslims. So it's like, we have to understand, it's like, okay, we understand that there's Hamas, but Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade has Christians and Muslims. Right? It's like, it's not all one thing. You know, it's not that it's nuanced, but it's that you have to understand there's more than one group. How could most of the resistance from Israel be coming from Muslims when most of the people who are Palestinian aren't Muslim? It's like 52% of them are Christian.
And also, what was the other thing I was going to mention here? Is that this kind of breakup also exists in so not only in Palestine, so a lot of these groups are actually run by Christians.
Yeah.
And then also with Egypt, a lot of political organizations in Egypt are not going to be predominantly.
Yeah, they're not going to be predominantly Muslim simply because you're going to have lobby groups and different organizations. If you look at when Mubarak was forced to step out of power, and again, it shows the ethnic makeup. There were groups in the north of Egypt, like some German groups in Egypt. There were Germans that were there. Germans in northern Egypt. Wow. Yeah, the Germans that were like, we need to form like a socialist party. Right? There was a group that tried to create some type of Nazi party. For about 2 years, there was an Egyptian Nazi party. I'm like, how in the world is there an Egyptian Nazi party?
Anarchists as well, do you tell me?
Yeah, there are anarchists in Egypt as well. There was some guy named Samir something or other, like some type of, fanatical anarchist. And he was, ethnically, wasn't Arab, he was some other group. So this assumption that, there's sort of this homogenous body of people that are running over this area called the Arab world.
There's a monolith, and they're all the same.
Yeah, they're all the same.
I remember one time I saw a statement, I think it was on Gab, and someone tried to say, someone from the Anglosphere, not a Muslim, tried to say that, what you're seeing in Syria with ISIS, this is just what's always been happening. This is just the norm with Muslims and Christians. Oh, hold on a second. Well, why is ISIS in the news then?
Yeah.
This has been happening for 1,000 years. Why is ISIS in the news?
Yeah.
And then I also recalled, because this was not long after Imam Muhammad Sayyid al-Bulti was murdered, and at his funeral, there's Christians at his funeral.
Yeah.
And then there's actually
one of the heads of the Greek Orthodox Church was there.
The patriarch is there.
Yeah.
I think Lucas, I think one from Syria, I think another one from Lebanon came over as well, and they're actually speaking, and they
were there.
They're mourning him and so forth. So clearly, the relations are not what you think it is.
Yeah.
And again, these people aren't all Arabs.
Yeah.
Imam Bulti was Kurdish, and
it's the same thing with the Coptic Patriarch meeting with the Sheikh al-Azhar.
Yeah.
Right. The Coptic Patriarch is obviously coming from this Bantu background. He's meeting with the head of al-Azhar, and they sit down and discuss strategies for ensuring that the two groups are able to live more harmoniously. And this happens every year, and sometimes meetings are called together, spontaneously. Now, this has been going on as long as there's been an al-Azhar, and as long as there's been a Coptic Patriarch, which has been as long as we can remember.
Yeah. Because it was Baba Shenouda before. Who's it
Baba
now?
Shenouda the third before. Now it's Baba Tewodros the first.
Okay.
So now he's the one. But his issue is he doesn't have as much gravitas as Baba Shenouda, because Baba Shenouda willingly went into monkhood. He was known for fasting. He was known for his deep monasticism. Tewodros is good in terms of the religious kudos that are required for a patriarch. But because he's a younger man, he hasn't yet laid the deep foundations and established himself with charisma and everything else to the same degree that people have Baba Shenouda III. That he hasn't established that yet. Okay. And he's going to need maybe a decade before he's fully seen as, okay, he's competent.
So how what are the numbers for his population then because Egypt is 90 million people?
Yes.
Something like that. So the Christians
if you're looking at 90 million people, a lot of times the CIA word book has put the Christian population at 10% or 11%. But I would say, looking at other stats and also details and historical references, I'd say it's actually probably closer to 20%.
Yeah.
Simply keeping in mind that the south of Egypt still has an abundance of Coptic Christians that aren't usually counted. They're not usually looked at.
How would you put them in a census?
Yeah, how would you put them?
Especially they're nomadic or they're just in far out areas.
Yeah, so you have these type of issues. So I'm saying it's probably closer to 20. Between 18 and 20.
So probably something like 15 million maybe.
Something like that. I'd say it's probably closer to that. Right. So that's what I'd say. So they have a lot of strategic influence, and they've been one of the main people that sort of helped keep Egypt stable is these ethnic people. And you can still when people go to church services, you can still sometimes see them using Coptic in their service. They use Greek, but then some of the liturgy will be in Coptic. And Coptic is the modern descendant of this ancient language known as Medu Necher. It's still being used.
Yeah, because I remember because this is just before I became Muslim, I did visit Egypt, and I remember going to a Coptic Orthodox church on a Sunday morning. I was raised in the Russian Orthodox church. I think the first thing I noticed when I went to the church was, Jesus is darker now.
Yeah, everyone's brown. All the disciples are brown.
He's really brown now. Where's the blonde hair?
What happened to him? All these things happened. The same thing happened to Joanne Lumley when she visited. She wanted to follow the trail of the Nile all the way until its source. And she went into a church in Ethiopia. And they took her outside to a place where the saints are venerated. And it's the oldest picture of St. George. Georges. It's the oldest picture of him.
And that's his cross. That represents England. Yeah,
that's it. And he had this huge natural, like Huey P. Newton. He had brown eyes, big brown eyes, big face. He's riding on, some type of, Central Asian or possibly North African horse. He's got a sword, and it doesn't look like, a rapier. It looks like some other type of sword that would be used in, sub-Saharan Africa. And he does not look like he's from Perth or, Bournemouth. He looks like he's probably from there.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. So I think we've covered a lot of ground here. Before we conclude, do you have any reading material you could recommend? Any books people could read to look more into this issue, the history of the Arabs and who they are?
Sure.
And where
If people wanted to start off looking at history of the Arabs, again, these are like, I wouldn't say these are textbooks, but these are good places to get you started if you don't have any access to the Arabic. So if you don't have any access to the Arabic and you're looking to get sort of a panoramic view with many different angles, I'd say to start with Philip Hitti's History of the Arabs, to start with him. Then Albert Horani is another one.
is that called History of the Arab Peoples?
History of Arab Peoples.
Yeah, I've read that. Yeah.
David Lamb is another one. He has History of the Arabs. I'd say to use these three books and then to go to their bibliographies and then scout those and read those. Because these books are based heavily on their bibliography. So to read these books and then say, okay, I enjoyed these, but I want more. Okay, go to the bibliographies, go to the notes, and then read those. Now, sometimes those books are going to be in Arabic, so try to get as close to that as you can, the source work, because the closer you can get to the native languages, the more material you're going to find. And the more material you're going to find, the more data you're going to be able to unearth, and the larger of a view you're going to be able to get.
Okay, but on the same note, what would you recommend to read for, say, learning about some of the non-Arab peoples, especially, and also you say Christian groups and Jewish groups maybe that live in the Arabic-speaking world? Okay, what would be some good books to read on that topic?
I would say that there's a big monster set of books. I can't remember the author. It's like several authors. It's called The Aramaean Empire.
Okay,
and it gives the history of that. Aramaean Empire. There's another book, I can't remember the author again, but it's called Carthage Must Be Destroyed. And it gives a really good history of the Phoenician peoples, particularly dealing with Carthage and their interactions with Rome and how the difficulties Rome found in subduing them in Carthage and the continued battles back and forth. It gives physical descriptions of the Phoenician people, their exploits, famous Phoenicians, their traveling, their culture, their language. There's even, I think there's like a language key in the front that has sort of alphabetical symbols for ligatures and all this other stuff. So there's a lot of good stuff where you can just sit and just take your time and read.
Okay, wow. And is there any articles or things like this maybe that you have?
Articles, if you're looking for articles, something short and simple, I'd say probably one of the best articles you can find on these topics is if you went to either the Encyclopedia Britannica online or the Catholic Encyclopedia. I think the Catholic Encyclopedia is actually better, Encyclopedia Britannica, because it's more voluminous and they really go into detail, but they give you sort of a condensation of everything. Then at the end, they'll give you all these notes and say, okay, well, for further reading, please do this. Encyclopedia Britannica is great, but for some reason, when they brought it online, a lot of the further reading codices they had at the end, they didn't include. They left them off, and I don't know why they did that. They just left them off. But for the Catholic Encyclopedia, because it's their encyclopedia, and because they can control it, they left everything in.
Okay, fantastic. So I think we've covered enough. Inshallah, we'll list these talking points briefly, and we'll list put the reading list below, inshallah. And I think that's enough. We covered it. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. Jazakallah khairan, Al-Hajj Abu Ja'far al-Hanbali. And inshallah we will convene soon again for another discussion. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.